Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about what clouds are made of. And to start our discussion, we're going to talk about something that you're probably already familiar with, which is software as a service. You might not know that you are using a software as a service application probably every day in your life. Okay, so let's think about what a common software as a service might be. Software as a service is where the entire infrastructure, operating system, and the software that is provided by the third party is given to you in the form of a web application. A pretty common example is email services. Think about Google providing email service to you, or even any other provider. Let's say Yahoo has Yahoo Mail, and there are many other types of software as a service email providers. Another type of software as a service is something you may be familiar with is Dropbox. So Dropbox provides storage as a service that allows you to save your files from your computer off to that Dropbox storage. So there are many different types of software as a service. You might even be using something like Office 365 in your corporate environment. So Microsoft provides a web-based Microsoft Office services using Microsoft Office 365 interface. And that is software as a service as well. So you see where this is getting to, right? Software as a service is pretty common, and you use that on almost a daily basis without even knowing it. So now we have an understanding of software as a service where you got the web application delivered to you using the web interface. Now let's talk about infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is the underlying hardware that's required for you to run your applications. So if there is no hardware, no network, and no storage in the backend, Google will not be able to provide you with the email services, isn't it? So they cannot provide you with a software as a service. But what if there is a requirement in your organization where you want to work on virtual machines or physical servers, right? So you need the underlying infrastructure itself so that you can start building your own custom applications. That means you want the compute, you want the network, you want the storage, and all those components that we need so that you can create your own app or software. So infrastructure as a service is where all of those infrastructure related entities like the compute, CPU, memory, network, storage is all handled and provided by the third party. So if you look at the hardware stack, the stack is basically a set of components that are grouped together to form an infrastructure. So in this stack, you got network. Now we spoke about networks a little bit in the previous lesson. And then you got storage. Storage is again where you keep all your data. And then you got something called compute, which is the brains of your operation, right? So that gives you the ability to do the processing. So when you put the data on compute, the compute is able to process the data to complete the task based on what kind of data it is. So when you do infrastructure as a service, you are actually leasing or renting that infrastructure stack, which is the CPU, memory, storage, and the network. So you're paying your third party to provide you with that hardware. Just for an example, think about a virtual machine that you are hosting on AWS for that matter, right? So infrastructure as a service will be giving you that virtual machine with your cloud provider, and all the interaction will happen with something called as a hypervisor. Hypervisor allows us to create virtual hardware. So now all of these components like the compute, storage, and network are all logical in nature. They are in the form of a software. It's the hypervisor that will let the compute talk to the real physical hardware. So on top of the hypervisor, we're now able to utilize virtual machines, and these virtual machines will make up your infrastructure as a service. Okay. With that, let's move on to platform as a service. In certain situations, you may not want to host your own hardware as well. At the same time, you don't want to go for software as a service. You want something in the middle, which is platform as a service. So let's say you want to host a database and you are a database expert. You're great at running all the queries. You know what SQL stands for and you can make your own customization. So you're a great app and database developer. But of course, not everybody has knowledge on every sector. So similarly, the app developer and the database guy does not know about the infrastructure components. For example, they don't know about the backups. How about encryption, security? and various other parameters that go into the details of the infrastructure. So that is where you will go ahead and provision a platform as a service. In platform as a service, going back to the same example of the database, what you're essentially getting is just the database. Let's call it as SQL. So in platform as a service, if you're looking for SQL, you just get SQL. You do not have any control on the underlying hardware or the underlying operating system, right? So that's what platform as a service is. The difference between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service is that in infrastructure as a service, you get a lot more control on the hardware. In platform as a service, you can just host your applications, just connect to the database and host your data, but you do not have control on the underlying hardware. Well, in infrastructure as a service, you can install your own operating system and then install the applications on top of it as well. In platform, you don't get that option. In platform as a service, you do not have an option to choose your own operating system. Okay, so that's platform as a service. So when people provide cloud computing services, they are basically providing one of these three types of services, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Let's go on to another section where we talk about private clouds, hybrid clouds, and public clouds. Okay, so a private cloud is where you control everything. Okay, that means you have your own data center, and inside this data center is your compute, network, storage, and everything that's required to make a data center. Now, the advantage of owning your data center is that you can customize this however you want with whatever kind of hardware, and you can manipulate the hardware whenever you're ready. You can upgrade that, get rid of some CPUs and memory, and bring your own when you want to do that. So you can do whatever you like to do with that environment. But of course, there's a cost of doing that, and that is really high. It is expensive to build and maintain data centers. And the life cycle of equipment is typically not more than 3 to 5 years. So you might spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or potentially millions of dollars as well purchasing the equipment. And the sad news is that in 3 to 5 years, that equipment has to be replaced. So you can imagine in 3 to 5 years, that equipment has to be replaced. So you have to invest high capital cost only to get 3 to 5 years out of that equipment. And then you got to pay for the employees as well who are supporting the equipment, got to pay for the electricity, power, cooling, and everything that goes along with it, right? So once you've purchased the equipment, it's yours. And if you don't utilize it, that's kind of bad for you. So you already paid for that equipment. That's where hybrid cloud comes into picture. And a lot of organizations are doing the hybrid cloud here, where you will have part of your infrastructure on your premise inside your data center and some other parts, some of the services with the cloud provider. So let's think about a service called as backup and disaster recovery. And that means that if you got something like a disaster happening in your environment, tornado or a hurricane comes through and wipes out your data center, we can then just fail over to the cloud, right? So in this case, you got some of your infrastructure on your premise, but just for disaster recovery purposes and to keep the lights on, you got that infrastructure replicated to the cloud as well. Of course, you're going to have some kind of connectivity between your on-premise data center, your corporate data center, and the cloud. This is hybrid environment. So with this, you get great flexibility. You will also use hybrid environments when you would like to migrate a piece of your data center to the public cloud. And then over time, you migrate over to the public cloud as the public cloud gives you a lot of flexibility because there are no upfront costs. It's pay as you go. So for some reason you decided that you don't want to use the cloud anymore and you don't want to pay for it, right? You might have to come with a migration plan to get your data out of it so that you don't have to continue to pay for the cloud if you don't want to. The overhead is really low because all of that underlying hardware, the cooling, the power, and everything that's required to establish the data center is handled by the cloud provider. So you don't have to worry about those costs anymore. The public cloud is definitely scalable and elastic. And we're going to talk about that in the next lesson where we understand the key characteristics of cloud computing. But at this time, just be aware that the elastic environment can grow and shrink and can be dynamically used when utilizing the public cloud environments. And this is something you really do not have when you use private cloud. Again, there are challenges with governance, right? So when the governance rules changes, also when the compliance regulations change, you got to follow them. In public cloud, it's the public cloud provider who does all those changes and takes care of those challenges. You got to be very careful about the type of cloud provider that you want to utilize. You have to utilize the cloud provider that will support you with your requirements, will be helpful in provisioning resources faster, at the same time keeping your deployments simpler. Make sure that you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. Just a question for you. What kind of a cloud provider is AWS or Azure for that matter, or Google Cloud for that matter? Think about it. Now, AWS and Azure and other cloud providers as well, they provide infrastructure as a service and platform as a service as well. That means you get the underlying hardware provided by AWS, and then you can also choose to host a database on platform as a service. You can set up your own virtual machines to install your OS and your applications. On the other side, you also get something like a simple storage service, S3 in AWS. So S3 is kind of a bulk storage where you can upload virtually any type of file. Think about it like a Dropbox service or Google Drive service, where you upload the data into the Google Cloud and it stays there. S3 is something similar to that. So AWS provides infrastructure as a service, but they also provide additional services that provide applications as a front end to those infrastructure services, just to simplify your ability to utilize AWS. So that's about it in this lesson. Just to summarize, in this lesson we spoke about what public clouds are, what infrastructure as services, software as service, and platform as service. We also learned about public clouds, private clouds, and hybrid clouds. Thanks for watching.